We are a coalition of communities of faith and people of courageous love across Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington counties, engaging in the practices of sacred organizing to activate the power of our relationships for creating more housing equity and immigration and racial justice in our communities, counties, and states. That is why we are here and gathered tonight. And so I want to know who all is here with us tonight. Who all is gathered in this space? So if you or the team that you are with will be organizing in Clackamas County, on the count of 3, I want you to unmute yourselves and give a shout out for Clackamas County. 1, 2, 3, Clackamas County.
Yay!
Ooh, all right. All right. If you are here and you will be organizing in Multnomah County, on the count of 3, unmute yourselves and give a shout out for Multnomah County. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Yay!
Hey!
Multnomah. Multnomah.
Yay.
And if you are here from Washington County and you will be organizing with folks from Washington County, on the count of 3, unmute your mics and give a shout out. 1, 2, 3. Woo!
Yay!
Washington County.
Washington County.
Props for Washington County. So we are so glad that you are here tonight with us. Well, folks, the other part about being here tonight is that we are recognizing our relationships and our interconnection with one another. And so in doing so, I want to share with you a grounding that I read from Thich Nhat Hanh. And it just meant so much to me that I want to share it with you tonight to ground us in our work together. And I'd like you to imagine for a moment a beautiful flower. And that flower might be an orchid, or it could be a rose, or even a simple little daisy growing alongside a path. And looking into a flower, we can see that it is full of life. It contains soil and rain. And that flower also contains sunshine. It is also full of clouds and oceans and minerals. It is even full of space and time. In fact, the whole cosmos is present in this one little flower. And if we took out just one of these non-flower elements, the flower would not be there. Without the soil's nutrients, the flower could not grow. And without rain and sunshine, the flower would die. It is full of the whole cosmos, while at the same time, it is empty of a separate self-existence. The flower cannot exist by itself alone. And like a flower, we too contain earth, and we contain water and air, sunlight and warmth. And we contain space and consciousness. And we too are full of so many things and empty of non-separate self. We contain our ancestors, our parents and grandparents, education, food, and culture. And as we gather tonight, we honor the sacred soil that bears within it the ancestral life of the indigenous peoples of this land, including the Multnomah, Clackamas, Cowlitz, and Kalapuya. And we commit to living in good relationship with the ancestors and the descendants of all who have known this sacred soil as home. And tonight, though, we also recognize and we say that we trust in the sacred interconnection of all and the creative and liberative power within these relationships. And we recognize our complicity in racist systems that oppress, harm, and steal life. And we commit to being transformed and to taking actions that resist, disrupt, and heal these broken systems. All life depends on it. And so tonight, we celebrate that the whole cosmos has come together to create this wonderful manifestation that we are. And we remember, if we remove any of these non-elements, the air, the soil, the water, the sun, if we remove ourselves from one another, we will find that there is no us left.
Gracias, LaVeta. Buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Mira Ayala. Soy organizadora en el vecindario de Cully, en el noreste de Portland, con el proyecto La Casa Común. Y también soy parte del equipo de diseño del condado de Multnomah, de la colección de vivienda y tierras, de Leaven. Y estoy muy contenta de estar aquí, de verlos a todos. Y también ahora quiero invitarnos a unir nuestras voces y nuestros cuerpos a este enraizamiento en nuestra interdependencia, nuestra interconexión. Entonces vamos a traer nuestras voces y nuestros cuerpos a esta interconexión. Y vamos a hacerlo, o vamos a continuarlo, por cantar una canción que se llama Tierra, mi cuerpo. Entonces les voy a mostrar los movimientos porque en un momento vamos a cantar, van a mantener los micrófonos apagados, pero vamos a cantar juntos esta canción con los movimientos. Entonces los invito a todos, a todas, a todos que hagamos estos movimientos, ¿ok? Para que nos veamos en la pantalla, ¿ok? Aquí es como, esta es la letra. Dice, tierra, mi cuerpo. Entonces vas a poner las manos aquí en la panza. Tierra, mi cuerpo. Agua, mi sangre. Aire, mi aliento. Y fuego, mi espíritu. Tierra, mi cuerpo. Agua, mi sangre. Aire, mi aliento. Y fuego, mi espíritu. Ok. Pueden mantener los micrófonos apagados y vamos a cantar.
Tierra, mi cuerpo, agua, mi sangre, aire, mi aliento y fuego, mi espíritu. Tierra, mi cuerpo, agua, mi sangre, aire, mi aliento y fuego, mi espíritu. Tierra, mi cuerpo, agua, mi sangre, aire, mi aliento y fuego, mi espíritu. Tierra, mi cuerpo, agua, mi sangre, aire, mi aliento y fuego, mi espíritu.
Gracias por cantar. Ahora quiero pasarlo a Jake Bailey. Él nos va a compartir una historia de su experiencia de mover desde la desconexión hacia la conexión. Entonces, Jake, te invito.
Thank you so much for that, Mira. I think the motions always help me get more embodied and settled into the evening. As Mira said, my name is Jake Bailey, he, him pronouns. I am the organizer and heartbeat holder for a lot of the organizing work out in the Washington County cohort. And it's just so great to be back with you all tonight to see all the old faces and new faces. I'm just very grateful for every one of you. Washington County had the recent experience of starting the cohort just in January, so not even 9 months ago. And there was a lot of learnings and a lot of action that took place in that time. And as Mira stated, one of that was moving from disconnection and into connection, from isolation and into community. And to kind of help shape and share some of that story, Marcia Loney, who is a member of Sherwood UMC and Mountain Home UMC out in the Sherwood area, was a part of that process. And so I'm going to invite her to unmute now and share some of that story with us tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Jake. It's always good to see your smiling face. So yeah, I became a part of the cohort when it started last January. Our pastor invited us to check it out, and I did that, and I liked it, and I stayed. You know, Mountain Home, the Methodist church, my faith community, is really good at doing a lot of things. And a lot of the things we do are the same thing that a lot of churches do. You know, we're very good at supporting Willowbrook Food Pantry, and we're very good at providing a little holiday cheer for homeless youth. And we're really good about financially doing things when there's a crisis. And we're very, very, very good at putting on a really epic holiday bazaar. But what I did find out, and what we did find out from participating in the cohort, is that there are a lot of things that we might be really, really good at that we'd never, ever considered. And one of those things was reaching out to elected officials about particular legislation that might have an impact on preventing a need from ever being a need. And that was new for our church. I mean, certainly as individuals, we've all written our congressman or congresswoman or made a phone call, but we've never done it as a congregation. In fact, it was so new to us that when it came up as an option, when we presented a couple of House bills to our church council, we decided we better check with district to make sure it was okay if we did that. And that seems really funny now, but that's kind of where we were. So the shift for us from going from disconnect to connection is that's just one of many, many things that we now know we can explore as a congregation, as a faith community. And that was just after a few little months with the cohort. And I'll just add one more thing on a personal note. It's because of one of the one-to-ones that I did in the first part of our getting together. I've now joined the Hillsborough Food Co-op, and that would not have happened had it not been for the cohort.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Marcia. It's been so wonderful to walk alongside you, your community, your congregation, this work. As Marcia mentioned, so that one-to-one, we'll have some time for that in just a second. So I'm going to hand it back over to Mira or LaVeta, who are going to take us into that section.
Gracias, Marcia y Jake. Ahora vamos a entrar en un tiempo de conectar uno a uno, una a una, y vamos a darles una pregunta para empezar esta conversación. Esto es una de las prácticas centrales de nuestra comunidad, es compartir nuestras historias por medio de conversaciones uno a uno. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿en qué parte de la vida experimentas desconexión o conexión? ¿En tu cuerpo, con la tierra o en la comunidad? ¿Y cómo te afecta eso? ¿En qué parte de la vida experimentas desconexión o conexión en tu cuerpo, con la tierra y con la comunidad? ¿Y cómo te afecta eso? Entonces vamos a entrar en esas conversaciones por unos, creo, unos 8 o 10 minutos. Y LaVeta nos va a decir a qué hora vamos a regresar. ¿Ok?
And the question is on the screen. Where in life do you experience disconnection or connection in your body, the earth, or the community? And how does that affect you? All right. Well, I sure hope that you all had a good conversation with someone that you probably didn't know. And that can be a little intimidating over Zoom. But, you know, this pandemic has really helped a lot of us come out of our shells on some things. And so I'm just curious, this is a time when you can unmute yourselves and where we can hear one another's voices. And my question to you is, where in this gathering so far has there been a shift for you? Where has there been a shift for you from a sense of feeling maybe disconnected to a sense of feeling a little more connected? Where has there been a shift? And maybe what was happening when you noticed that? And anyone is welcome to share.
When we sang that song and did the motions.
Yeah. Go ahead,
I'll say
David.
something if nobody else is. I'm John Hasenjaeger, and I'm seeing on the screen Chris Delacruz, my associate pastor, right next to me, and David Groff, also from Westminster Presbyterian. And just my example of feeling connected has been with Chris's work and getting us involved in this meeting, feeling more connected with people who are engaged in serious organizing within faith communities and across faith communities. And I identify with that very strongly.
Dorothea, did you want to share with us?
Well, I was just going to say that in our group session, just listening to everybody and saying what I felt, because I kind of grew up feeling disconnected just from the way my family birth order was and just the circumstances of my life. But listening to some of the other women speak, in particular, things that they've experienced in life are similar to mine, as far as one woman talked about a widowed group of people who get together, and that sounds very nice. So I've been single different times of my life, and I'm living alone now, and I could relate to that. And it just made me feel like, oh, even though I'm alone, it's not, we're all kind of in the same boat in a way, and it just made me feel less alone. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank
Wonderful. You. Thank you. And one other person tonight. Is there one other person who would like to share that shift for you?
Michael Colvin has their hand up.
Well, hi, Michael.
Hello there. It's nice to see so many familiar faces.
Yeah.
That's my connection point this evening. And it's good to be back doing this work. And hopefully we'll see some real movement develop out of this. I'm excited about that.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Well, I just want to give us a chance one more time to have this experience of connection with one another on the screen and in our bodies. And I'm going to play the Tierra Mi Cuerpo song one more time and invite us to do the actions together again. Earth, my body. Water, my blood. Air, and fire, my spirit. Tiega, okay? So I'm gonna play that song for us one more time. And you should be able to see one another. There you go.
Thank you for that, LaVeta. Friends, it is so good to be with you. This night, this kickoff night is really for us about like who's in the room and who are we together and what has happened before this. I am Julia Nielsen. I go by she, her pronouns. And I am so thrilled to be a part of this community again this year with all of you. I came into this work with my own former congregation, Portsmouth Union Church, when we realized that we wished to have a legacy for our increasingly destabilized community in North Portland by changing how we thought of the land that we had been given to worship and serve on. And that discernment over a number of years and the organizing that was done by this sacred organizing coalition means that that church will now host more than 60 new neighbors in affordable housing this year. And so what seemed impossible to us became possible and gave us hope in a time when hope was what felt like a non-renewable resource, frankly, because of sacred organizing. So it is my pleasure to outline what our work is together in the coalition for you and to outline some of the origin story that has come before this gathering, what we learned over the last few years as we've traveled together along the sacred organizing spiral, which if you're not familiar with that, Sarah Lose will help us understand it a little bit further later on. So we're organizers and leaders who are creating pathways for all people in Oregon to experience sanctuary and home in our communities. That's who we are. And we're rooted in the work of anti-racism, centering the lives of marginalized and displaced people who have been marginalized and displaced by unjust housing and immigration policies. And we work collaboratively in the intersectional ecology, as we call it, the ecology of land and immigration and climate change, through activating the power of our relationships to create more housing equity and immigration and racial justice everywhere we land, communities, cities, counties, and state. So since 2018, this coalition has been a part of and worked primarily with congregations interested in exploring questions around the land we occupy and the possibility of building affordable housing on that land. But recently, and we are the Land and Housing Coalition, right? But recently, recognizing the intersectionality of our work and our communities and the relational webs that already have existed amongst us in partnership with Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, we've begun moving toward a more holistic approach to notions of quote unquote land and housing, recognizing the shifts that happen when we unveil and start to dismantle the systems and structures that treat land and people as commodities. When we treat land and people as commodities, we perpetuate racial violence. When we understand land, however, not just as empty space to be built on or partitioned and lotted out and divided by human, invented, and policed borders, but rather as home to our ancestors who have been buried there, our many peoples who have stewarded that land ahead of us and before us, and the other than human inhabitants, past, present, and future, we begin to shift how we think about who we are on that land. So we're evolving. This space you're in right now, these 100 people are part of an emergent practice and community. And like all evolution, it's not out of nothing. Our relationships define where we start as well as where we end. So before the coalition even existed formally, Leaven Community and Emerge, the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, organized together at the intersection of immigration and housing on behalf of our neighbors. At that time, focused in the city of Portland around tiny home access. And so you'll be able to hear a little bit of that origin story in a moment through a video we'll share, thanks to Jake sharing it with us. He'll help us do that in a moment. But the evolution that I'm talking about, and especially the evolution of our language and our practice, shows the emergence of the work. It shows the work that we're in. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those shifts that we've made over the last 3 or 4 years together as a way to tell the story of our origins and our learning together. It's better, I think, to do it this way than to tell you the facts of our history, because it shows not only the story of this coalition over time and across geography, but also the kinds of experiences that core teams like yours and individuals, all of us, have when we fully engage and commit to 9 months of traveling together through the sacred organizing spiral. I have experienced this myself. I have been, if you will, converted to this myself. And what we learned over the last few years as we continue to travel this spiral is that we need to move from some things to some things. So that one of the things we need to move from is isolation and the sense of independent do-it-yourselfness. And we need to move toward building collective power. We've learned this over time to be very effective. Most of us started as individual congregations or communities going it alone. My own definitely did that. But over time, traveling together, we've learned how to move from isolation to collective power that actually changes things and takes us from the world as it is to the world as we have imagined that it ought to be. And we've moved from property to land. When we imagine the spaces we inhabit, and I invite you to truly do this, do we imagine ourselves as colonizers who have now taken over a piece of property with power over it? Or do we honor those places as gifts that we are afforded the opportunity to serve and steward on behalf of previous and future generations? So from property to land. And then we've learned about how to move from ownership to stewardship. And we recognize that the unjust seizure of land has made our ownership possible, right? And that it's only with a really clear view of self and ourselves in community as caregivers within that community rather than owners of it, that we can discern how to be in a healthy relationship to our land. We've also moved from churches to communities of faith and courage. And you've already heard that language tonight. We work intentionally and persistently to be in relationship with and alongside rather than over one another. And so we consciously honor and inhabit each of our community's traditions without centering one faith perspective. And this means also that any community can ask questions about the land that they steward. And we remove language that says only certain kinds of communities can be a part of this work. We've also moved, and you'll have heard this language tonight already and probably in other conversations, from community organizing, that familiar phrase, to sacred organizing. And we've learned that the ways we understand the world to be worthy and holy and divine and to have meaning, those ways help us to be in this work over the long term, right? My tradition, I'm a United Methodist, helps me to envision a world as I need it to become and as God has told me I am a participant in creating. As a 100-year multi-generational process in collaboration with descendants and ancestors, rather than simply issue to issue and emergency to emergency. So we move from community to sacred organizing. And then taking power, which is a phrase that I think some of us are probably pretty uncomfortable with, to taking power seriously. We've learned over time, and this relates to the moving from isolation to collective action, that we're not satisfied just to be in the room with people who hold power, or to replace current leaders with people who agree with us so that we can just get our preferred outcome. We take seriously instead that when we show up collectively, when we unveil the pressures on people, when we understand our interests and the interest of the person across the table from us, even when we disagree, that we can create outcomes that we couldn't have ever imagined or accomplished otherwise. And that's about power. And that's about understanding how power works. We also move from issues like housing or immigration or climate change. Some of you might have in your head, like, wait, are we talking about housing? Are we talking about immigration? Are we talking about climate? What are we talking about here? Because we move from issues to intersectional lenses. And by doing that, we move from, this is the one thing that's important to me in competition with your thing, to seeing and naming the ways that all people and all places and all pressures on those people and places are interrelated and how you actually can't untangle them one from another. Because trying to see them as separate prevents us from solving the problem and makes us waste precious time and precious energy fighting one another for resources and space. So this is our work together. This is just part of what we have learned together over the last 4 years across all 3 counties and across this work. I know that this year we'll learn even more because we will grow and change and evolve and transform even more as a coalition with you in the room, with this new mix of folks together. And I want to invite you, and Jake will help us to do this, to view this video that shows just one of the places where we started. And it's just a small illustration of what's possible when we move out of isolation and into this sacred organizing spiral together.
Cut to the chase. I'm thrilled to be here today to answer yes to your call. And as the commissioner in charge of the Bureau of Development Services, which is who enforces these codes, I'm happy to announce that with the support of the mayor, we will be suspending enforcement on tiny houses and RVs parked on private property, effective immediately.
Will you, Leaven community, friends, partners, and neighbors join us in the mutual work of accompaniment? If so, respond, yes.
Yes. Will you, Leaven community, friends, partners, and neighbors join us in showing up when you are called upon? If so, respond yes.
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 Will you, Leaven community, friends, partners, and neighbors join us in organizing power for policy change? If so, respond yes.
Yes.
Will you, Leaven community, friends, partners, and neighbors join us in cultivating safe space? If so, respond yes.
Yes.
Will you, Leaven community, friends, partners, and neighbors join us in supporting other sanctuary communities? If so, respond yes.
Yes.
Will you, Leaven community, friends, partners, and neighbors join us in holding physical sanctuary? If so, respond yes.
Yes.
So thank you, Jules. Thank you so much for sharing that story and giving us a grounding for what we're doing together and why we do what we do together. And people, because we know that being on Zoom can be a little taxing, we're going to take about a 3-minute break right now just to give your eyes a rest, to get some water, bio break, whatever else that you need to do. And we will come back together at 7:44. We'll come back at 7:44 because 7:40 already kind of hit a little early. All right. See you in about 3 minutes. And now we're coming back together again. And Anna, who is with the Clackamas County Cohort Coalition, is going to take us a little more into how we do this work together. So Anna.
Hey y'all, I am Anna Hosley, and I, as LaVeta said, is one of the staff organizers for the Clackamas County Cohort. And I am so excited for our work together this year and so moved by the faces in this room because I am absolutely captivated by the power we have together in the midst of things I never thought I would have any power to affect. And I am moved and changed by what I've seen the people in this room do together. I really just can't get over it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how all the pieces of all the people in this room work together so you can locate yourselves and the folks you see here in this big story that we share. So this big coalition, all the folks in this room are spread across 3 big county teams called county cohorts. We have a cohort in Washington County that you see there, a cohort in Clackamas County, and a cohort in Multnomah County. And I'm going to break down for you what each county cohort is made of, starting with these little bubbles down here, core teams. If you could go to the next slide, LaVeta.
I'm just going to give those who are in Spanish readers a minute to look at it also, Anna.
Great.
Okay.
So a core team is a team of people from a faith community or a neighborhood organization who listen to the needs of their neighborhood to discern how they can leverage their resources together for the good of the community. So for example, in Clackamas County, for our first cycle last year, we were made up of 4 core teams. Each of those core teams was a team of about 3 to 8 people, each of whom in our case represented a faith community in 4 different neighborhoods in Clackamas County. So then we have design teams. These are the team of people that supports those core teams. It's a team of organizers who provide leadership and learnings for the gatherings like this that we will do together in our cohort spaces, and who walk alongside each core team as they discern the movement of their neighborhood. So there will be never a moment that you're doing this alone. And also that team, that design team, supports the cohort in shared action together. And now I'm going to tell you about how we gather together in the different spaces that we gather. If you want to, there we go. So the county design team gathers with all the core teams in their county in one, in most cases, virtual space, at least for now, to learn together about how to discern the movement of their neighborhood, of their community, and to engage in shared action as a collective. So right now, all of our county cohorts are all together, and there will be a couple times throughout the year where we reconnect in this way again to see the power of our whole coalition all together. But for most of the months that we're together, we'll be meeting just with our county cohorts. Pop to the next one. And then also the core teams meet together. So the county cohort gatherings happen once a month, and also each core team generally meets together once a month just as a core team with a member of the design team that is accompanying them while they do that work of discovering how to listen and discern and act within their faith community and in their neighborhood. I'm going to tell you also a little bit about like why do we operate this way? Core teams actually often engage in this cycle more than one time because this spiral that we walk through is by its nature a generative and an iterative process. And people sometimes ask, why is that? Why do people come back? Why do people keep coming back? Didn't they already learn the things? And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that why. And it is because this is more than a one-time project. This is a movement that you are building in your community and in your neighborhood. For example, many of our cohorts end up in this process that we've talked about of building affordable housing, which doesn't just provide 4 walls, but really is a place of thriving that is integrated into the neighborhood, that is alive. That is a multi-year process that spirals and roots into deeper and deeper layers as we move more deeply into it. The first year, sometimes that learning can feel a little bit like a fire hose as you learn and start to find your way in the work and experiment with what it feels like. And then often the following years is where you begin not just to learn it and try it on, but to really practice it deeply, where you begin to kind of hit a groove and the practices begin to settle into your bones. And things start to happen. Things start to happen around you, and suddenly you're kind of in it deep because there's a movement happening that's bigger than you, And at that point, you are ready and hungry for this learning, even some of the things you already heard once that are suddenly hitting you at a whole new level. And you're like, tell me the things I need it right now. And not only that, through this process, you will begin to add more and more folks to this movement. So it becomes not only a place to learn about your next step as a team, it becomes a space that helps you build new leaders and voices that have added to your movement and are ready to learn with you. You actually begin too to learn how to teach them and accompany them and what they're just learning and starting to do. And also, you need help with this movement. There's a reason we are a coalition. There are barriers in our systems that you cannot overcome alone. Some of us have tried. This is why this exists. We are not just building a project, we are building power. We're building collective power to change the things that are broken in our system, that stand in the way of our neighbors finding a home, that stand in the way of us building home. So this process, this movement needs you as much as you need this process. We learn from one another, we strategize together, we act together. Because when we act as individuals, we act alone and we are powerless in the face of a system that's bigger than us. But when we act as a collective, we find that we are not alone and that together we are powerful. So I'm going to pass it on now to Sarah, who's going to introduce us into the sacred spiral that grounds all of this work together.
Sí, gracias por toda su paciencia. Mi nombre es Sarah Loisoy y soy una organizadora con el Movimiento Interfe por la Justicia Migrante. Y estoy súper contenta de estar aquí con todos ustedes esta noche y también por esta nueva colaboración con nuestros amigos y amigas y colegas de Leaven Community. Lo que quiero platicar un poquito esta noche es acerca del espiral de la organización sagrada. Entonces, no sé quién puede poner el dispositivo ahí, tal vez Sarah o Ana. Pero el eje principal o el hilo conductor de estos cohortes que estamos hablando es el trabajo de la organización sagrada. Y por eso se llaman cohortes de organización sagrada. Pero, ¿qué es la organización sagrada? Una manera de definir la organización sagrada es como el proceso de construir y ejercer el poder colectivo para hacer realidad un mundo donde la vida pueda florecer para todos. Es lo que ocurre cuando nos reunimos, cuando salimos del aislamiento y entramos en comunidad y trabajamos juntos para desmantelar y transformar los sistemas y las políticas que impiden que la vida florezca. Y para construir en este proceso, los sistemas y comunidades que nutren la vida. Entonces, la espiral de organización sagrada nombra algunas de las prácticas específicas que forman parte de este proceso. Y solo quiero hablar brevemente acerca de algunas de las prácticas que vamos a practicar dentro de nuestros cohortes. Y uno es el encuentro sagrado. El Sacred Encounter. Y el encuentro sagrado es el trabajo de escuchar profundamente y con reverencia. Es lo que sucede cuando empezamos a contemplar y conectar con nuestros compañeros, nuestras compañeras, nuestros vecinos y vecinas, pero de una manera más significativa, cuando dedicamos el tiempo para escuchar y aprender sobre sus vidas y sus historias y luchas y anhelos más profundos. Y es la escucha que nos saca de nosotros mismos y nos conecta con algo más allá de nuestro yo, más allá de nuestra propia iglesia o comunidad o persona. La desvelación sagrada ocurre cuando empezamos a descubrir dónde está o dónde reside el poder. A ver quién o quiénes o qué tiene el poder de iniciar el cambio. Cuando empezamos a entender las formas en que mi historia se relaciona con la tuya, que mi dolor está conectado con tu dolor. Y cuando nos damos cuenta de las formas en que los sistemas e instituciones más grandes ejercen el poder sobre nosotros y sobre nuestros vecinos y vecinas, ya que perpetúan y sostienen los sistemas, ¿no?, de supremacía blanca y de la desigualdad económica. Entonces, la desvelación sagrada no es solamente eso, pero también es lo que ocurre cuando empezamos a entrar en contacto con nuestro propio poder, el poder que existe dentro, internamente y entre nosotros en comunidad. Un poder que no proviene de la violencia física o de la dominación, ni del dinero, ¿no? Pero sino el poder de las relaciones entre nosotros, con la madre tierra y con lo que podríamos llamar lo divino o el espíritu o el amor. Y la acción sagrada. La acción sagrada es cuando ejercemos nuestro poder colectivo para tratar de lograr un cambio concreto en nuestras comunidades y vecindades. Puede ser que cientos de miembros de una comunidad se presenten para ofrecer su testimonio en una audiencia pública frente al Consejo Municipal, o que se ponga la primera piedra en la construcción de un nuevo centro de vivienda comunitaria, concebido, poseído, construido con, por y para los y les inmigrantes, refugiados y solicitantes de asilo. Cabe recalcar, creo, que somos más poderosos cuando nuestras acciones son tan vivos, vivificantes tal vez, y inclusivas como el mundo que pretendemos hacer realidad. Y por último, la pausa sagrada. Eso es lo que nos ayuda a mantenernos alineados en mente, cuerpo, espíritu, con nuestros valores y con los y las demás. Y es cuando hacemos un espacio intencional para reflexionar, para discernir, para crear sentido juntos, para celebrar y articular lo que estamos aprendiendo también en lo largo del camino. Para resumir, los cohortes son el lugar, el espacio donde aprendemos y nos involucramos en estas prácticas de la espiral de la organización sagrada y donde descubrimos formas de ser y construir comunidad juntos, ¿no? A pesar de todo lo que está a nuestro alrededor. Pero todo esto sigue siendo muy abstracto, creo. Entonces, para ayudarnos a desempacar un poco esto, quiero invitar a la pastora Sarah Fisher de la Iglesia Episcopal San Pedro y San Pablo a compartir un poco sobre su experiencia y la de su congregación en este proceso de la organización sagrada. Pero para esta parte lo voy a hacer en inglés. But for this part, I'm going to do it in English. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Hey.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Sarah Fisher. I'm an Episcopal priest. I use the pronouns she, her, and I serve Saints Peter and Paul, which is a very small parish with a big heart on Southeast 82nd Avenue. Our original church was built in the early 20th century on land that not long before that had been part of the traditional homelands of the many, many different bands of the Chinook and other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. The Montevilla neighborhood where we are provided rich farmland for early colonizers and later for Japanese Americans. Like the indigenous peoples before them, the Japanese American farmers were removed and displaced. Their land, their means of subsistence was taken away forever. And so we recognize that the land that we steward, our little church, is not really ours. And part of our sacred organizing cycle has been continually at different levels interrogating our relationship to property and ownership, and continually working on that movement that Jules talked about from the left column to the right, and continuing to move through that spiral. We have about 30,000 square feet of buildable space on 82nd Avenue with, and if you're from Portland, just to kind of ground yourself, Hong Fat supermarket is immediately to our north, and the family fun RV lot, which is one of many, many, many RV lots on 82nd Avenue, is immediately to our south. Our 1950s era building is completely unremarkable, but it is home to many, many different community activities and ministries, and we are most connected to people who are desperately in need of supportive housing. The whole neighborhood is rapidly gentrifying and is living with the tension that all of you are aware of rising home prices and lack of housing. So I became aware of the Leaven Project, and I think that our initial interest was about sustainability and viability for our little parish community. You know, I heard from one of you stories about how much your congregation grew when you started talking about affordable housing, and I thought that sounds good. And I heard from another one of you about how, you know, in a few years you were going to be getting tens of thousands of dollars every year for your congregation from the land, and I thought, that sounds good. So, you know, my confession is that we started, you know, being in it for the money, for the security, for the long-term sustainability. And the way the spiral has worked on us has been kind of shedding those attachments in favor of a promise of transformation and hope. And this transformation began with practicing sacred listening through one-to-one conversations, through virtual house parties, and all of those things led to what I would call kind of sacred imagining. So there were a couple of encounters that really shaped our work. One was this really surprising moment. Our parish has a tiny, tiny Latino community. It used to be much larger. Things changed. A bunch of things have changed over the last 3-4 years for our parish, and particularly since the pandemic. But we had a virtual house party with these 3 ladies, and we learned, with the help of an interpreter, what you know, what life is like for families that are living in tiny places, and what landlords are like for immigrant families, and listened to all of those stories, and then began to say, well, this is kind of what we're thinking about. And this woman said, well, would we be able to live in that housing? And we were sort of wanting to hear their experiences of home, but it had never occurred to us. She was like, well, church people would have first pick, right? And that just made us start looking at the project completely differently, and made us start looking at, you know, what other conversations did we need to have? And that's the thing about the listening part of sacred organizing that many of you are familiar with, is that every conversation leads to more conversations and more conversations, and every conversation leads to a different kind of a vision. We had a bunch of one-to-ones with people who were living outside. We learned things that we just didn't know, like that a lot of people who live outside are not eligible for shelters because they live with their adult children, but they don't want to be separated from their adult children, even if their adult children are of the opposite gender identity. So that was part of our learning. We learned about the relationship between sleeping outside and anxiety and mental health disorders. And I think that, I mean, there's a lot more than I can say, and maybe Sarah can help me sort of, you can tell me where you want me to flesh things out, but we're sort of building this really grand vision of a really integrated, supportive, transformative community. And the vision has been built by every conversation that we've had. And we have this wonderful core team and we get together every month, and sometimes it feels like all we're doing is kind of going over what we did last time, but we always move. We keep moving forward, and the team is fluid. People come and go. It's made up of people from the congregation and from the neighborhood and from some of the other community projects that use our space. And but the vision has really come out of, it's continuing to get refined, and it's come out of this practice of storytelling and listening and then stopping to dream. And I am not a terribly patient person, and I tend to be fairly concrete, and I tend to want to solve problems right away. And so the transformation in me has been being aware that this spiral never ends and that the learning never ends. And we're still listening and still learning about what home means to our neighbors. That's always the question that we start with in all of our conversations, is what does home mean? And so we're excited to keep going in this process.
Beautiful. Oh, Sarah, you're sparking for me so much of that like sacred imagination that I think I just heard you coin, which now I know we're all going to start using. But I wonder if we've got just a couple more minutes. I'd love to dig a little deeper into the story that you just shared, which is beautiful and sparking for me so much sacred imagination. But I wonder if you might talk also a little bit about, there's two things I wonder we might touch on. One is a little bit what it's meant for you and your team to do this as part of a broader cohort and alongside other teams, this process of organizing.
I think that's been part of the learning process. One of the things that has been great is learning how much everybody's experience is different, and hearing different core teams work through what they're working through, and seeing all the different kinds of challenges, and knowing that whatever we're going through, someone has been through it. And the other thing is having a liaison is great. And just bouncing things off other people who are in the same process, and sharing experiences and asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a whole new world, like learning about affordable housing development and all the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to not be, I wouldn't be able to venture into that whole new world without other people who are doing the same thing.
And I wonder about, I mean, sometimes when we talk about the sacred organizing process.
Could you start again? I had to turn the English off.
Okay. Thank you all for your patience. Sometime I will figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. But I'm curious to hear, Sarah, in that sacred organizing kind of spiral, we talk a lot about encuentro or encounters, and you've talked about unveiling, like learning what is existing in your community, where some of the needs were, things that you weren't sure about. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit too about sacred pause and what that has meant for your community and how that's showed up over this past year for you. Practices of reflection and meaning making together.
I think it's a good question. And I think it's, I can't say that we've been like super intentional on the pause part, probably because of the aforementioned quality of mine, of being impatient and concrete. But I think that, but sometimes that those times when it feels like nothing is happening between core team meetings, and then we get together and we reflect and we realize that there's stuff that's happening inside that we're figuring out. I mean, there's so many, I mean, without going into the particulars, if you are in this process, you know that there are all these like sticky wickets, like, what kind of developer do we want? Or how much green space do we want? Or how do we communicate this? Or how do we figure this out? And sometimes you just have to step back and just say, I can't figure this out now. And the answer is going to be revealed, or the person is going to be revealed who's going to help us figure it out. And so I think the way that I have experienced sacred pause, and I can't speak for anybody else on my team, has been to just let go of trying to know everything at once and trying to solve all the problems.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. I think we have to pass it out to close out the night over to Jake now, but I really, thank you for sharing your story, for sparking some imagination in all of us. And I look forward to walking alongside you in your community this year.
Thank you.
All right, Jake, want to close us out, friend?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. I know that it's always a good regrounding and reminder to hear those stories of how and why we do this work, especially when we don't know or it feels sticky, or to remind us who we're walking with and why we're walking. As we close out this evening, I see a lot of sleepy faces. I see some eye rubbing and some yawns. I myself am one of those people. So as we close out tonight, I just invite you to reach up as high as you can to the sky.
Can't hear Jake.
Stretch out your back. Look up. And then bring your arms down and rest them on your stomach, or right between your chest and your stomach, whatever is most comfortable for you. I invite you, as you're comfortable, to close your eyes and take a deep breath in and out. And keep taking those deep breaths. And as you do, I want you to digest everything that happened this evening. Give spaciousness for the words and the stories that were told. And now I invite you to think of the next hour or the next day, and who you are excited to tell these stories to, or who you wish to share this moment with. Who are you going to call or talk with in the coming days? Picture their faces. And as you are ready, I invite you to move your hands from your stomach to the keyboard and type those names into the chat. If you wish to protect their identities, please just type their first names of who you wish to walk with in this work. It's a lot of name, folks. And as those names keep filing in, I invite you over this next week to set up a one-to-one conversation with them, just like we did at the beginning, inviting them into that sacred encounter, into the sacred space, the sacred practice of community building and collective power together. Reach out to them for a deepened connection of belonging within your communities, and see if this might be something that they're interested in walking with you in, as this is a truly mutual process. And now I'm going to invite you to do your first little bit of work here. We have a Google form for you. I don't know if you saw, but at our peak, we had 100 people in this Zoom room. That's incredible. And that's a lot to keep track of. So please click this link as you are able and fill out this form for us right now. It'll take you about a minute or two. We'll come back at 8:21. And yeah, fill this out so that we might know how best to get in contact with you throughout this season. And as you invite folks into this process with you, as you have these one-to-ones and people are interested, please also invite them to fill out this form so that we might be able to get in touch with them as well. So we'll give you a minute or two to fill this out, and then we'll meet back for some closing. Awesome. Thank you all for doing that. Continue to fill it out if you haven't completed it quite yet. Like I said, this will help us be in contact with you throughout the season. And as we've stated throughout the night, know that you are not alone in this process. We'll be following up with you, not just individually, but as we piece together design teams, a member of the design team will be walking with your core team specifically throughout this process. They will be your go-to person. They'll be sitting in on your meetings. They'll be following up with you one-to-one to help you discern what this process looks like in your community and to help you hold some of the tension that is surfaced and some of the life that is surfaced as well. Along with emails, we'll be following up with some packets for y'all that will contain cohort specific information, as well as some of the stuff we covered tonight, which is going to be the spiral, what exactly is a cohort, as well as what is this coalition, and what exactly are we a part of here. But as we close out tonight, as is part of our practice, we do evaluation. This is incredibly important as we reiterate these meetings and as we incorporate new and old voices to make sure that everyone is feeling seen and heard and comfortable tonight. And so I invite you to share in the chat an answer to this question of where in this evening did you feel life, excitement, or possibility for what could happen? Maybe it was a piece of a story or something that someone shared. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. Scott says the one-to-one conversations. Joshua felt possibility listening to Sarah Fisher's story. During the breakout session, la conversación uno con uno, one-to-one conversations. Sarah Fisher's story. I love the storytelling and the info that Anna shared. I felt possibility in the translation struggles. I usually don't have to think about translation in my life or notice how English language is privileged. This format with its awkward pauses is stirring reflections for me. Grateful. Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Hearing all the stories. Yeah. Jules' overview, Julia's presentation, definitely. La traducción en español, poder entender tranquilamente. The translation in Spanish. I could understand everything peacefully or with fluidity. Definitely. Keep throwing in these good vibes into the chat. And I invite you now to shift your focus onto where were spaces in this evening that you felt lost or confused, or perhaps maybe wished you had a little bit more time on. Those are equally important. Marianne, more one-to-ones, always more one-to-ones, right? This is the center of our connection. I feel you. Wanted to hear more from Indigenous voices. Thank you for that, Beth. Collaboration with multiple organizations. Yes, definitely. And by so quickly, I did not feel lost. So many new concepts, eager to learn more. Yes, Frank, Joan, excited to be walking alongside you. I want to learn more about the sacred spiral and how we can transform into our daily life. Yes. Feel free to keep throwing these into the chat. But one more time before we close out, I invite you to take one deep breath with me. And I know that we are not embodied in person today, but as you feel comfortable, I invite you to turn on your camera. And scroll through the screens just for a second. I know that this is something that I can forget to do as I facilitate meetings to see who is here. Who are we walking alongside this season? I mean, there's 100 of us. So take time, look people in the face. These are the folks who we are walking with, and there will be more next time as well. As we close out the evening, I invite you to unmute yourselves and wave at everyone goodbye until next time. And we'll be following up with you all very shortly.
See you all next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye.
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 Good night.
All of your faces. Yay!
See gallery? I knew I could do that.
Night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night. Bye, everybody.
See you later.